I'll be as honest as I can here. I've always had mixed feelings when it comes to horror games. The people who know me personally wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that horror is my favorite genre of movie, but they might be surprised to hear me say that horror isn't my favorite kind of game. I just find it harder to really enjoy horror games. I've lost count of how many promising titles I just can't get into because of their over-reliance on jump scares. Now don't get me wrong, jump scares are fine, and there are definitely horror titles that work well with a focus on them. But if all I end up doing is waiting for something to go oogity-boogity in my face, then I'm just not going to enjoy the title. Especially if that same game ends up overstaying its welcome by going on for hours longer than it ever needed to. Dead Space is a game that feels like it's aiming for some kind of middle ground between atmosphere and in-your-face scares. It has good area design, sound work, as well as seemingly regular reminders that, by the way, things want you dead. And as previously mentioned, I'm conflicted. I suppose it's important to note that this isn't my first foray into the Dead Space series. After all, I've mentioned in a past review about watching Dead Space Downfall, an anime prequel that showcases the events on the USG Ishimura before Isaac gets there. I, however, didn't mention that I also watched Aftermath, which takes place between the first two games, and that even after watching both of those films, it would be years before I planned to even beat the first, game. Not a mark against it, though, just circumstances. Dead Space, the original Dead Space, was developed by EA Redwood Shores and published by Electronic Arts. EA was already pretty big at the time. Army of Two was relatively popular, Sims has never not been, and Mass Effect itself exploded onto the scene in 2007. But EA Redwood wasn't. Sure, they did some work on expansions for The Sims 2, as well as work on various officially licensed titles, which is weird to say when I'm not talking about THQ, but nothing they made really saw nearly as much success as Dead Space did when it came out in 2008. Hell, the first game they put out under their new name, Visceral Games, was the Dead Space spin-off Extraction on the Nintendo Wii and later PS3. It's a hallmark of the careers of everyone involved, for better and worse. Gotta cover Callisto Protocol at some point, don't I? The game came out in 2008, but not before EA released the Lullaby trailer, showcasing this creepy rendition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star coupled with flashes of horror imagery. A very memorable trailer and better showcasing the duality that the game offers. The proper launch trailer had that this feels more like a movie trailer problem, but thankfully came out just before the overly expository marketing that trailers almost feel contractually obliged to have these days. It did have one arguably annoying problem, but that's for later, and it's likely not even something you would, notice unless you played the game. However, one of the first things you will notice after launching the game is that it does have problems on PC, being a console port and all. This game has potentially game-breaking problems at any FPS beyond 60, but the in-game VSync option, which locks it to 30 frames per second, isn't exactly a great solution, since these problems affect more than just how fast the game runs or whether or not a door can open. The second problem is tied to your mouse. Natively, the mouse aiming feels like hot garbage. Input timing and mouse movement is delayed so the camera and reticle don't stop moving for a brief span of time after you do, which, in a game as focused on precision as this one, is actually hell. It's not easy to convey visually, but rest assured it is bad. It's made somehow even worse by using the in-game VSync, which nixes the potential solution to the physics problems already being caused by the frame rate. My proposed solution is one that I have graciously stolen from someone else. Grab Dead Space Mouse Fix. It exists. Turn off in-game VSync. Force on VSync outside of the game using your control panel and cap the game's frame rate to 60 FPS. You might still have some serious sensitivity issues when walking on certain surfaces, most notably the occasional human goop, but otherwise the game will be fine from here on, which is great since it allows you to also immediately notice that this game, which came out 15 years ago, still plays pretty well. Outside the console port problems, but we just dealt with that. Up front, the horror of this action horror isn't as well executed as I would have liked, and when the game wants to scare you normally, you know it wants to scare you long before it actually makes the attempt. Like a haunted house staffed entirely by 12-year-olds. You can practically hear their giggling. They're so ready to scare the hell out of you. The gameplay isn't as stop and go as the game's plot progression, thankfully. Isaac, being an engineer on board a planet cracker designed for deep space rock breaking, naturally doesn't have the weapons that professional military forces might. nor would he have the skills to use them in the first place. In fact, throughout his entire armory of gear he can use to combat the necromorphs, only one is an actual weapon. Everything else he uses primarily to commit OSHA violations, and of course he would. They're really useful for limb removal, as the game reminds you multiple times when you first grab the iconic plasma cutter. Let's be real, this is kind of ridiculous. This is hand-holding NPCs without an NPC to actually hold your hand. Still, having tools means nothing if there's nothing to use them on, and I love the necromorphs. The necromorphs, as horror antagonists, I find really interesting to think about. I love them both conceptually and in execution. Since the game is all about precision, the necromorphs themselves need to be enemies that reinforce that idea, both visually and mechanically. The slasher looks like nothing you want in your face, and it takes bullets like I take ibuprofen. In both cases, the problem remains. You've got to get rid of their, slashers before they go down. This design mentality is the same across the board for every enemy in the game. I mean, yes, there's small annoying nuisance enemies, but they're not the norm, and even more interesting to me at least, is that despite me not really seeing this game as scary, there's still one specific enemy that I fucking adore, and is responsible for the only legitimate jump scare that I experienced during all of my streams of the game. The Divider. Can I go now? Can the game let me have control of my fucking eyes? Thank you for giving me back control of my eyes. Hey, look, it's another save point. Let me just, save again. Ooh, a thing. Hey, money. Anyways, let's just go into the elevator and pretend nothing ever happened. Right? That's the best course of action. That is the best thing possible to do. Hello? Loud noises. Oh, hi. Oh, you actually surprised me. Not even a joke, I jumped a little bit. Congratulations. You've done something none of your necromorph allies were capable of. I did not expect to see you there. Okay, I know you're there. Oh, there you're climbing around. Oh, he's just stuck. He was just stuck in a loop. I had to put him out of his misery. I mean, okay, yes, I did distract myself, and that's how the jump scare happened, but I'm not going to discredit it occurring just because of my own inattentiveness. It got me, and fair is fair. The necromorphs hit that spot between Romero's unyielding undead menace and Carpenter's weaponized body horror, and I love it. I just can't get enough of them. It'd be a real shame if some future sequel added enemies that ignore that basic concept of aim for the limb. The only gear I didn't really need to use, outside of specific enemy encounters to any significant degree, were the kinesis and stasis modules. Kinesis negates the need for forklift safety training videos by using the force to move objects around in the environment. It's not as deadly as it will be in later games, but there's still plenty of environmental hazards around to remind the necromorphs that being a space engineer means that Isaac knows things can in fact go boom. Stasis temporarily slows and pauses either a necromorph or an object in place. It's normally used for environmental puzzles, and honestly didn't end up using it too much in combat outside of 2 specific enemies. I even told myself that I was going to see if it can be used on the giant dragging tentacles, but I just never got around to it. Now that I think about it, I don't think I had too much of a problem fighting the necromorphs at all. I imagine part of this is the normal difficulty selection that I went with, and part of it must be my prior experiences with the games. In fact, the majority of my deaths were the result of environmental hazards, some of which just, I think, had bad hitboxes. Apart from these occasional hitbox issues, visually the game also holds up despite its age. A lot of which can be owed to, well, the ship. The USG Ishimura is a mining ship meant for planet cracking, and you can tell. I mean, not from everywhere, a corridor here is a corridor there, but each room you go into feels purposeful. A poster showcases the potential need for replacement limbs. Here's a room suggesting they're harvesting stem cells for those limbs. How does a huge-ass ship like this deal with its life support systems? Hydroponics. How do they relieve stress or actually dig into the chunks of rock that they pull from planets? Space hoops, and right here. While most of the places in the game world don't feel that lived in, this is more because the game doesn't venture into too many areas that would be more leisurely than the places that the game does visit. This is a primarily industrial ship, after all. It does also get repetitive as well, unfortunately, just not in terms of area design. Most areas you visit in any chapter you'll go back to in a future chapter, which in a game that lasts about 9 hours and housing 12 chapters is noticeable. The music and audio design does its part to make it known that the Ishimura has seen better days though, and while the range is pretty drastic, I do enjoy it. I feel like I should specify, by range, I don't mean quality. I mean like volume? There's a distinct reliance on musical stings, especially with the game's scary moments. Scary, of course, being a word I use with exceptionally sized air quotes, but I really love the quieter moments when the game is trying to build up tension when it does happen. The sound design is also well done, easily being one of the main contributors towards when this game does build up its moments. It's not as if the game doesn't have an appropriate atmosphere, it just doesn't really focus on it most of the time, which is a damn shame in my mind, as the story likewise shares in building that atmosphere. The year is 2508, and the USG Ishimura, a Planet Cracker-class mining vessel funded by the Concordance Extraction Corporation, better known as the CEC, is on its final voyage prior to being decommissioned, tasked with mining the planet Aegis 7. But during this seemingly standard mining operation, it goes dark. In response, a small ship also funded by the CEC called the Kellion searches for it, and on board the Kellion are Chief Security Officer Zach Hammond, Computer Technician Kendra Daniels, and Engineer Isaac Clarke. With the Kellion crash landing into the Ishimura, we can finally get into the game proper, which immediately sets up Kendra's suspicion of Hammond and the fact that neither are necessarily the brightest people. They ask, how did the captain die? We've all seen and dealt with necromorphs by this point, though, you know what, to their credit, Captain Benjamin Matthias did not get killed by a necromorph. Man got stabbed through the eye. To counterbalance this bad news, however, we also get the Kinesis module and a snippet of Nicole mentioning how the clinic is going to shit. The fact that she left behind an audio log suggests that potentially she's still kicking somewhere. Besides, Hammond promised that he'd help find her as long as he's helped in turn. I'd call this a win in our favor. Except for the part where the Ishimura is out of fuel and has a decaying orbit. That has put a damper on things. All the chapters are like this, by the way, with a problem being solved but another cropping up. It's almost comedic. Not literally predictable, but you can be certain that things aren't over until the credits roll. Chapter 3, Course Correction, is when the game's preceding events begin to appear, as an audio log goes into detail about the dementia that the colonists were dealing with. I mean, with the necromorphs around, this can't really be too much of a surprise. What might be surprising, though, if Kendra is to be believed in the call she makes to Isaac from her super barricaded, super selfish room, is that this hysteria might be caused by something they dug up from Aegis 7. Something called a marker. Of course, she enters Chapter 4 by continually questioning Hammond about the marker, as she still doesn't trust him. We don't have the time to worry about that, though. The Ishimura has entered a debris field and is traveling to re-enter orbit, and we're basically sitting ducks so long as the Asteroid Defense System, or ADS, is offline. And we also discover our first log of Dr. Kine, which is where I'm putting up my spoiler tag. I want to talk about this game, but the things I want to talk about are definitely spoilers. Head here if you want to skip that. So that video log with Kine told us two things. First, the captain's death was accidental, a result of trying to sedate him when relieving him of duty. Second, the reason Kine wanted to sedate him was because he was a fanatic unitologist, believing the marker to be some kind of divine providence and thus wanted to deliver the artifact to the Church of Unitology. Unitology, at first, isn't explained all too much, but does have some information gradually drip-fed as the game progresses. It is a religion seemingly focused on a conspiracy theory. I'm not kidding. The focus of this conspiracy theory that Unitology practically deifies is a man named Michael Altman. The conspiracy goes that Michael discovered an artifact that the sovereign colonies wanted hidden. In their attempts to hide it, they killed Michael, though not before word spread. What he discovered was the Black Marker, and his teachings suggest that the marker is a metaphorical key to heaven, and through death can we humans be reborn as better humans. I'm really dumbing it down for the sake of expediency, but that's the basics. The fact that this marker exists could arguably be proof that Michael Altman was correct, but the marker's presence here raises even more questions. It explains why the Ishimura had unitologists infesting its chain of command. When word got to the church, they put some of its members onto the Ishimura, as they already had a vested interest in the study and nature of the marker. But is the red marker's existence also why the USM Valor was close enough in forbidden space to catch the jury-rigged distress beacon we sent out? What Allman found was a black marker. Why is this one red? I've got some answers. So the Valor was definitely around, since EarthGov, a portmanteau I don't think I need to explain, knew about the potential threat the marker poses, especially when you consider that EarthGov's predecessor, the Sovereign Colonies, were the ones who put it there in the first place, some centuries prior. This is also why the marker is red, as they made 3 makeshift copies of the original black marker, setting them up on 3 separate planets, Kremar, Aspera, and Aegis 7. The only reason they even knew that the marker is dangerous at all is because all 3 planets had simultaneous necromorph outbreaks, with the one on Aegis 7 resulting in the hive mind. But the marker does more than just make necromorphs, it also psychologically fucks with people. It's hinted at throughout the entire game, through logs and some comments made by Kendra, who can't help but mention that she's seeing her deceased brother. It's all really fascinating. And then comes Dr. Mercer, because this game couldn't be complete without a religious zealot antagonist. The man does live experiments about necromorphs and, as a direct result, created the hunter who just can't die until you kill him. There's also Dr. Kine. He's the guy who accidentally killed the captain, and if the way he acts is any indication, he isn't necessarily someone who's completely trustworthy. Still, he didn't make an affront to God in an attempt to convert you to his religion, so that's a point in his favor. Plus, with Hammond permanently out of the picture and Kendra mysteriously silent, Kine is one of the only 2 lifelines that we had to fix the problem. How are you doing?
Hurry! There's no time to waste, we must do it! Wait, Amelia, where are you going?
Sorry, Isaac. I couldn't let him go through with it. I suppose I should thank you for finding the marker. We even managed without help from the USM Valor. Thank you for helping me find him, by the way. My department's been looking for this place for a long time. See what Kine didn't know was? It was the government's mess to begin with.
Turns out, Kendra, she works directly for EarthGov and is also potentially the reason why Hammond couldn't talk with us at various points throughout the game. Unfortunately for her, her attempt to abandon us on this desiccated ship are thwarted when Nicole gives us a call and says we need to bring Kendra and more specifically the marker back. Before the ship is fully pulled in, Kendra ejects so we can't confront her about her sneaky shenanigans, and so we enter the endgame. Literally, the final chapter. Chapter 12, Title Drop. Here we do an annoying kinesis thing and discover by way of Kendra that Nicole is dead, and has been this entire time. It is a really nice reveal, but it also raises a couple of questions. One, more than others. Who did Nicole's job earlier? I mean, we can pretend that it was just Isaac doing both tasks under the marker's influence, or even that it was all just the marker's influence and none of what happened there actually happened. But come on, that just can't be it. That can't be all. Connecting the marker got us into a bit of a problem, since Nicole has been effectively a hallucination caused by the marker. Everything that she has told us to do in the game has been to its benefit. And so now, enter the hive mind, and the massive chunk of rock falling out of the sky that the newly connected marker is causing to fall from the sky. We're on a timer now, so we need to get off this rock, and we almost make it, but the hive mind blocks both Kendra and Isaac from leaving. Kendra got the short end of the stick here, getting absolutely bodied by one of its massive tentacles, leaving us to fight this thing. I mentioned earlier that I had a problem with the launch trailer, and this is it. Here it is, the hive mind. The final boss of the game, the ultimate threat the past 9 hours have been building up to, was shown in the trailer. A casual viewer of that trailer won't know that until they beat the game, so it's not as if too many people would really notice without already reaching this point in one way or another, but it's still kind of weird in my eyes that they put the final enemy of the game in the trailer. Bringing it down is fun, even if the space rock isn't floating overhead, since it was the one and only visual bug I spotted in my entire run-through that wasn't tied to a port issue, and watching that same rock wreck the planet as we escape is also a very nice touch to the ending. We get one last jump scare, hi honey, and credits roll. Personally, as I've already mentioned, I love the necromorphs. I think the game adheres a bit too much on certain writing tropes, but otherwise it's a fine enough story. It doesn't answer too much about the threat, and what it does answer tends to lead to more questions. The good kinds of questions, not the kinds of questions that can be left from an unsatisfying, largely unnecessary cliffhanger brought about through DLC. Yeah, I'll get there eventually. Isaac being an unvoiced protagonist makes the plot feel driven outside of direct control of the player at times, but it also kind of lends itself to the haunted house vibe that the game has. Coupling that with the, at this point, well-known plot reveal and hints in literally every single chapter leading up to it, and I enjoyed it a fair amount. I'm left with curiosity and a want for the next game, which is exactly what it feels like it's intended. Dead Space, again, most specifically the original from 2008, is a good game. The necromorphs are one of my most liked enemies in horror, across all media even. The gameplay can be rarely visually off at times, but the way the necromorphs work in tandem contributes directly to how it wants its horror to function. The story was solid, if a little telegraphed in parts. I'll get to the remake if and when I can, but for now, this is good enough on its own, genuinely. Plus it's like $20 these days. It's an easy recommendation to make. Even more so if you can find a cheap copy on the 360 or PS3, since at least there you don't have to worry about the port issues the PC version has. Of course, that's also assuming you still have an Xbox 360 or a PS3 around. I apologize for the wait. We moved recently, and that was fun, depending on your definition of fun, but I should be back into the swing of things fully relatively soon. Next isn't Dead Space 2. It's whatever I happen to arbitrarily decide, and there's some real good options to pick from. I'll see you later. Story out.